However, Friday the 4th greeted me with heavy raindrops and also quite rumbling coming from outside. If I had been superstitious, I would have taken it for a bad omen, but instead, as the only negative consequence, it just invited me to keep on sleeping, what I almost did. Luckily, my refined strategy of the double time alarm worked out, in which I set up 2 alarms consecutively within a couple of minutes, so that at least the second one ultimately woke me up. When I jumped out of the bed, I passed some time orientating towards my missions for that day. The exam, and whatever was going to happen during our meeting afterwards. But for the moment I had to get done with one thing at a time, otherwise it was likely like walking stairs backwards. It likely concluded in a fall. So I adjusted my mind one last time before I drove straight to school in pouring rain. When I arrived, I saw dozens of students, or rather umbrellas, hurrying to get inside, as if they had to pass the exam in my stead. The occasion for that was the great sky together with the rain, which accompanied me all the time while driving into the city. Whether my mood would adjust to the weather or create its own sunshine first had to be figured out. So ambitiously, I made my way to the PC rooms, where the exam was going to take place. That was one core difference, namely. Unlike any other subject, informatics was set to occur inside one of the mentioned PC rooms, because as I said, practical programming was likely. And since they tried to copy the main abitur for the sake of preparation, the pre-abitur exams had as a result an identical procedure. I couldn't empirically verify that yet, but why would they lie to us? Anyway, my task was not to find arguments for the grade of congruence between pre and actual abitur, but rather to achieve halfway acceptable marks. And that was my concluding thought, as I slowly saw our teacher approaching. He greeted our course, consisting of less than 10 students, and guided us into the room to explain further formalities. As anticipated, he informed us about the implementation of such a terrible programming task. But to be honest, he was right when he claimed it was for the sake of everyone. Rather, we practiced a little bit in advance, than just approaching the main exam, utterly unprepared. So we knew at least what was going on. And what was also going on when we went through the exam for final questions was the realization, according to which we indeed had very much theory to deal with. For 90% of us, that was highly favorable, as we had margin in terms of our solutions. That means, within a source code, the computer decides on right or wrong. Either the program works or not. But within written words, you can explain a little bit more so that the teacher can give you some points, even when it's rather ambivalent. And this very principle, or hope, was applied by me when I wrote, and wrote, and wrote. Like Stephen King would write a new horror story, I wrote page after page, filled with technical expressions and explanations. That's exactly what I always became criticized for by some teachers. My literary eloquence. But it just felt so much safer to write as much as possible. I'm not talking about writing nonsense, but rather as much as possible referring to the context of the question. However, my eloquence resulted in the acquisition of another sheet of paper, which was commented by a silent moan by some students, apparently wondering what I was writing so much about. One sheet namely consisted of 4 single A4 sized pages, which I bombarded with words, so that one was by far not enough. As it turned out, after our little collective exchange when we had given away our worksheets, I was quite close to establishing a new record. Many students used about 10 pages to fulfill all the tasks, whereas I needed 17 to do that. Even Ben, who looked at me in astonishment when we talked a little bit further about the exam, doubted that I had chosen the most reasonable way to go. He claimed to have written 12 pages, but regarding those 17 of mine, he was almost shocked and asked me twice in disbelief whether I almost composed a novel for real. I replied that everything was going to be fine, measured by my gut feeling. Besides, I did it by far not for the first time, so I knew about the probable outcome. Once more, I didn't care too much about the final grade. As long as I maintained distance to the areas 4 or even 5, everything was going to be alright. But primarily we had to wait for some time, just like in the other subjects. Until then, the only results were our teachers complaining about our questions asking when the marks were going to be dealt. The illusions were always the same. The more you write, the more I have to read, and the longer you have to wait. My thought was in every subject almost the same. I am so glad that I'm basically the only one who writes proverbially on one entire tree. When there were more of my sort, we had the likelihood to receive the results both of pre-Abbey and main Abbey at the same time. But that had to be avoided, since pre-Abbey should serve as an indication and preparation alike for the actual exam. So at the worst, I presented my teachers with a couple of sleepless nights. Afterwards, I managed to breathe deeply when I noticed to have passed all 3 main exams. So corresponding was my mood, in which I fooled around with Ben for a little bit further. We joked around and talked about video games and so on, just like earlier, when this lightness in the air, or rather carelessness, was mainly present. Recently, everyone's mood was kind of strained, due to the exams that had to be taken seriously. And in my case, there was something else contributing to that. Precisely, since my process of recovering from the accident. Right when I recalled that, the coherent memory just began to strangle me. Like my excessive breath was suddenly taken away and replaced fully by a flat, hasty one that made me feel as if I was close to suffocating. I remembered that arrangement, which I had forgotten completely due to the current circumstance. There was namely another test within reach just waiting for me, which made me fully lose my composure. Luckily, the conversation between Ben and me had reached its final rounds, so that I managed to hide away my concern. When I got exposed, I had to explain everything, and that was everything indeed, since even my best friend Ben was among those people who had not a clue about what lovely, strange acquaintance I made within the last few weeks. Since I planned to maintain that as it was, I remained silent, while keeping in mind that there was still something incredibly fishy. Something that required immediate answering, because otherwise I would have gone crazy. Exactly that, furthermore, was my occasion in disguise for visiting Chloe that day. Of course, I wanted to see her again, enjoy her companionship, nurture our relationship. Though on the other side, I was well aware of the fact according to which there was actually no relationship at all with those mysteries and secrets involved. Until now she kept me on the short leash, while I obeyed submissively. But whatever it takes, today I will resolve those shackles she encircled me with, and reveal the picture she preserved inside the drawer of her bedside table. The picture she deliberately prevented me from seeing. My ambition was clear and mirrored back comprehensively within the thought right after I said goodbye to Ben. It slowly started to drain me, which was not of use by any means, especially in those weeks filled with all those exams. Sure, I had then a little bit free time, since the next tests, those regarding the less important subjects, were vaguely 2 weeks away. Firstly, I wanted to use that to gain an overview on all that stuff that was still missing due to my abstinence back then. But secondly, and most importantly, I wanted to eradicate everything draining me, so that I was capable of getting done with the rest in a reasonable manner. And with that intention set, I made my way to the all-too-familiar hospital, where I headed with tunnel vision straight to the room 511, where something had to be resolved. As I walked through the entrance of the ward on the 5th floor, I didn't spend much time dwelling in memory like I did last time. Instead, I walked straight past the nurse's office, 2 rooms further, and positioned myself right in front of the door to 511. Other people or distractions, like Jessica, didn't matter at all. I didn't care whether she was there inside and saw my rude prompt behavior. This time, I indeed came solely for Chloe, and that was plainly expressed with that. Subsequently, I performed 3 loud bony knocking sounds at the door, after which I entered without further hesitations. I instantly investigated the room, and within seconds, I recognized the person I searched for, so I intended on jumping into action without any delay. But one moment, easier said than done. As I approached the lower end of the bed lying right inside Chloe's field of view, I found myself struggling formidably, as I just noticed her gazing into my eyes. Not solely looking at them, but looking through them, as an ice-cold shower down my spine indicated. At first, when I saw her, my mood was a little bit lifted, due to the effect she undoubtedly had on me all along, but something else bestowed a torturing ache inside my stomach upon me. I didn't know at all what it was caused by, but it had the consequence that I had to bow myself forth a little bit, so that I propped my elbows onto the metal rim of the bed. I initiated then with a forced hello, followed by a little wave. I felt something being in the air, and in this aspect I could tell that much. It was not love, it was not trust, it was not unity. And the situation got even weirder as I saw what she was holding in her hands, preventing her from waving back. Once the red case, and once Frankie. Seriously unnerved, I approached a second time, to finally get a proper answer out of her. Hey, is there something new? She pressed the mentioned objects a little bit. If I had been in their stead, she would likely have strangled me again. But when her grip loosened a little bit later on, she finally spoke to me. So you're done with your exams, I presume? Yes, I replied, still utterly confused. Then I waited for her to continue, but in the end my passive behavior, consisting of just expecting something to happen, turned out to be in vain, as I only saw her struggling, not coming to an exploitable answer. Subsequently I poked her a third time, corresponding to the circumstance. Is everything right, Chloe? With that, I suddenly stopped any attempts to formulate something by juggling with single words. As a result, she looked at me once more and took a silent but deep breath before she gave it another try. Aaron, we need to talk.